everyone, and thank you for joining me again today for the Finding Hope After Loss podcast. I hope that you've been enjoying season 2 so far. I still have so many amazing interviews coming up in the next few weeks. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of them. And if you would ever like to be on the show, or if you have a topic you'd like to see talked about on the show, you can always email me. My email is Sarah, SARAH, @journeyforjasmine.com. Or send me a message on Instagram or Facebook at Journey for Jasmine. I'm always happy to hear your suggestions. So today we will hear from Amanda, who experienced the neonatal loss of her daughter Faith. Faith died at 26 days old due to complications of a congenital diaphragmatic hernia, or CDH. This story actually hits pretty close to home for me, as we lost Jasmine to the same condition when I was 32 weeks pregnant. And Amanda is also a life coach, and she's very big on her faith. She credits her faith for helping her really get through the tough grief after her loss. Hello, everyone. Today I am here with Amanda. Amanda, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. My name's Amanda, and I'm from California. I have three children, two living and one who died at 26 days old. I'm a wife. I'm a work from home mama who I get to do a lot of really fun things that I just love. I'm a life coach, and I also teach online writing classes. So it's kind of just my life in a nutshell is I stay home with my living children and also work from home and do a lot of things.
Sounds like you're pretty busy.
Yeah, and my life is very full.
So, can you tell us a little bit about your loss journey?
Yeah. So, my third child, was diagnosed in utero with something called congenital diaphragmatic hernia. And basically, what that means is there was a hole in her diaphragm, which caused her stomach and other kind of organs that are typically in the abdomen to rise up into the chest cavity, compressing her lungs and inhibiting the lung growth. And so we found out pretty early on that that was what happened, the diagnosis was about 20 weeks at the 20-week ultrasound. And we were surprised. We have two older children who were totally healthy. And but we decided to just kind of take it on faith. We're Christians. That's another really big part of our stories. We believe in God and really rely on our faith in Him to kind of lead us. And we just decided that the doctors kind of recommended termination, but we really felt that she was doing well in utero and there was a chance of survival. It was kind of like a 50-50 chance. And we were like, well, if there's a chance, then we want to give it to her. And so we did. We went through and um the pregnancy was very healthy. I was very healthy, other than you never would have guessed from the outside or any other markers that there was anything wrong. She was very active. She was very her heartbeat was very strong. She would get hiccups. She would get like all the normal movements you would expect. And so it was just an interesting process of having consistent checkups, and she was growing well. All the preliminary kind of diagnostics, once we made the decision that we were going to just kind of see what was going to happen and give her every chance we could, the doctors really worked with us on that. And we really just explored as much diagnostics as we could. And everything we found seemed to indicate that she would be okay, that it wasn't super severe. Because there's varying degrees of this particular defect. There's varying degrees, and by the time we were in the home stretch of that 35 to 38 weeks, all of the indications seemed to indicate that she had mild to moderate severity of in this defect, and so everyone was very optimistic. So um, she was born on November 5th, 2022, and it was wow, that was actually a very wonderful experience. My water broke and we rushed to the hospital as quickly as we reasonably could. I had to go to a hospital about 4 hours away from where I live, just because that was the closest that was equipped to handle a child with her complications. Um, so we get down to the hospital and um, funny enough, my water broke and then nothing. Like I wasn't contracting. I didn't feel like I was in labor. Like it was crazy. Yeah. So I get to the hospital and I'm still not contracting. Like it took me a while because of traffic and all the things. So from my water breaking at 1 a.m. to like getting to the hospital is like 6 hours. So I get to the hospital around 7 a.m. and I'm still not in active labor. And they're like, we recommend that you augment with Pitocin. And I'm like, that sounds like a good idea.
Yeah.
And so they did, and it took forever to kick in. Like seriously, and I wasn't stressed at all. I was just like, okay, cool, whatever. I'm gonna just take a nap. So it didn't really kick in till that evening. But and then once active labor hit, it hit hard and it hit fast. I would say active labor hit around maybe 9 or 10 p.m. and she was born at 1:30. And but it was great too because I didn't even have to push. She literally like fell out. Like
Made it a little easy on you.
it was really easy. Yeah, I thought I needed to use the restroom, so I get up and then contraction and there's her head and I'm like, okay, I
You're
guess
like,
that
ah,
wasn't
okay.
um so she came out again and again like in any other context, like if we hadn't had that diagnosis, we would never have known. She looked perfectly healthy. And but we knew what was going on with her. So, she's out. I got to touch her for 2 seconds while they cleaned her up. And then NICU, immediately took her and did what they could to make sure that she survived those first couple hours. And then kind of just began this really long, but yet in retrospect, fast season of being in the NICU with her. And for me, like labor, delivery, all that was fine. I didn't experience any complications on my end, which was, I think, a huge blessing because if having to walk through complications myself along with advocating for her and supporting her would have been much more challenging. Um, but when they got her and they did the imaging, they did some x-rays and stuff to kind of figure out how she was doing. She was not able to breathe on her own. So they tried to ventilate her, still didn't wasn't able to breathe. So they ended up putting her on what's called an ECMO circuit, and it's basically an external heart and lung machine, all within the first 12 hours of her life. And so I I think I saw her once but before the ECMO circuit was on. Um, because I gave birth, they took her to the NICU. I think a couple hours later, I was able to see her, but then I had to leave and they had to do the surgery to get her on the ECMO. And so then she was on this circuit. And the thing about this circuit is it's life-saving for many people, but there's only so long you can be on it before it starts causing other complications. And so she was on it and it was helping her. And then she ended up having the repair surgery for the hernia. And that's when we saw that she ended up having far more tissue, far more stuff up in her chest than we initially thought. She had her entire stomach, her entire spleen, and I think the majority, if not all of her intestines of were up in her chest, compressing her lungs. So the amount of lung tissue she had was significantly less than what was expected, based on the previous imaging that we had had. And so she had about 40% of capacity of what she should have had in a normal healthy child. And so basically kind of after the surgery, it was really just giving her every chance we could to recover from that. And so it was just a lot of waiting, a lot of ups and downs, and there were days that were like awesome, and seemed to be doing way better. She very quickly started swelling and becoming getting edema, being very swollen and retaining fluids. So after about a week, eventually had to add a dialysis machine. So they were having to add machines to support rather than being able to wean off of machines. And it was a very slow going. Her lungs were having a hard time expanding and opening up. And um, I would say the first 3 weeks, first week and a half were pretty hopeful. Sorry, first 2.5 weeks. Yeah. First 2.5 weeks were really hopeful. She seemed to be on a projected or like a trajectory of growth, of getting better. Like each day she seemed to be better. We kind of wished it would be faster, but every day was showing improvement. And then she kind of hit a point where it was kind of this like status quo where her lungs were getting better, but other parts of her body were starting to shut down and struggle. And so, and then there started to be just the bleeding and some things like that, just a lot of things, moving pieces. And I think the hardest part of walking through all of this was that like not knowing. And to have the like one day being like everything looks great and the next day things really weren't. And that's what happened. It was on Thanksgiving. On Thanksgiving Day, they did what's called a clamp trial where they were tested to see if she could breathe on her own without the machine, basically, to see if her heart and her lungs could do it. And she like almost passed. She was like right there, kind of one of those like, ooh, if we could like 1 or 2 more days at this trajectory and she'll be fine. And so we were all really hopeful. And we came into the hospital the next day after. So, that night we went not home. We were staying at a house down there, and we went to the house we were staying at and came back to the hospital the next day, and her lungs had completely collapsed again and were completely full. And I think that for me was the point where I kind of realized there's a really good possibility she's not going to make it. Up until then, I really believed that she was gonna survive. And yeah, it was really hard to just have just overnight like what happened. There was definitely a lot of those questions about like, what happened. Like she was so much better yesterday and just all of a sudden it was like her little body just started giving out. And my husband was with me in in at the hospital the whole time. He was able to take the time off work and so we were there together, which was a huge blessing. And my mom watched my older children for us. So it's just kind of my husband and I there at the hospital walking through this together. And um it's so interesting because, walking through it, it was just this day by day journey of what's the next right step today. Um, what's the next right choice for her? Our daughter's name was Faith. So what's the next best choice for Faith? Um, what's going to serve her? How can we really love her and serve her and give her every chance of life, but also not prolong agony if she's not meant to be here, not meant to stay very long. And those were some of the hardest conversations we had to have once her lungs collapsed, because it wasn't a simple like, oh, her lungs just need more time, because other things were giving out. Her liver was not functioning, her kidneys were not functioning. There was mysterious bleeding internally that we could not locate, and we weren't quite sure where it was coming from, but she was bleeding internally and all these things. So working really closely with these doctors and trying to adjust medications. If anybody who's walked through any sort of hospitalization with a child or themselves kind of maybe has had this experience of it's constantly this tweaking and balancing game of trying to figure out what's going to work when you don't really know. This particular, especially in this case, this particular defect is not necessarily super common. It's known about, but it's not like super, super common. And so there was also this level of like, there's no like, oh, standard procedure, cut and dry, like this is how to handle it. And it, the majority of the time they get better. It's really a case by case thing, an experiment really of how does their body handle things. And so, walking through that with the doctors, and we were really blessed with some really just wonderful doctors who really, really cared, and most doctors do. So I'm not saying not to say that they don't, right? But they just were so personal and they really, really were um they're the kind of doctors that make you feel like you're their only patient, you know? And so we were really blessed in that way where they would really take the time to explain to my husband and I what was, the what was going on medically so that we were informed and able to make very informed choices and have very informed input for, all working towards the goal of helping Faith. And so but basically, yeah, so Thanksgiving Day, she did great. Overnight, her lungs collapsed, and by the next day, she was even worse. So Friday, her lungs had collapsed. Saturday, she was even worse. She was very, very like her heart was starting to do weird things. Her vitals were just getting wonky. The hospital actually called me early in the morning and were like, we're not quite sure what's going on with her, but I think you need to come be here so that if whatever happens, like you're here. Um, and that was when that at that point we started kind of making some realizing that she was probably not going to make it. That there was, she was still alive, and so there was still hope, but the odds were pretty stacked against her. And so we were able to have my older two children come and visit and meet her, which was huge. I was really, really grateful for that. And the next day, so that was Sunday after Thanksgiving. And then the following couple days were really just this testing and waiting game to see what was going to happen because there was still like this kind of 50-50 chance of she could get better or she cannot. And so just taking each day as it came because my biggest prayer and my biggest kind of I don't know, attitude, heart was I want to make sure that if she does end up passing, like I don't want to I don't want to feel like I gave up too soon. I don't want to feel like what if I had waited just a little longer? Because basically it started becoming a conversation of should we pull the plug today? Because it was one of those situations where she was on life support. That's what this external heart lung machine is. It's a life support machine where if you turn it off, they don't survive anymore. And if they're not able to take care of them, their body on their own. And so she's on this life support, and it kind of tipped the scale in the life support that was on one hand saving her life was actually also killing her. And it was causing even more damage and pain. And so it's this decision that as a parent, like I would never wish this on any other parent ever to have to decide like at what point do you make the call that this machine that technically is keeping your child alive, but is also causing so much agony and pain to turn it off. And that's the decision we ended up kind of being faced with that week day to day of like, okay, at what point do we say, okay, enough is enough? It's causing her more pain than helping her. And Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday kind of went by working with and we had doctors and we were talking with as well who were able to kind of assess and see and give input in terms of like how her body was responding to treatment. But we we knew Wednesday night the decision was made that we were going to do one more uh, clamp trial to see is there any possible way that we can turn this machine off because it's at the point where nothing is going to get better till she gets off this machine. Like everything else is shutting down. All these other organs are starting to shut down. And so we knew Thursday morning we were going to do this clamp trial. And my husband and I, after talking and praying about it, we were like, well, she's going to let us know. And that's a conversation we actually had with her because I believe that children are people, right? Even the babies are people. And she could have a say too, like in what she wanted, that she would be able to communicate with us. So we had a conversation with her, my husband and I just talked to her and said, you know, for the first 3 weeks of her life, it was, keep fighting, you're going to get better. And those were the things we were telling her. But when she started to kind of turn, we basically had a different conversation where we just told her, like, if you want to keep fighting, we are going to fight for you and we are going to advocate for you and we were going to support you. for as long as you want to keep fighting. But if you are too tired and you're done fighting and you want to go be with Jesus, that's okay. You can let go. And kind of when we had that different kind of approach to how we were speaking to her, it was kind of like she almost needed that permission to let go and to kind of tell us like, no, I'm kind of done fighting. I'm tired. Because that was when she started showing us in her body like that she was kind of done holding on. And if that makes sense. And so over the course of a couple days that kind of became more obvious. So then we get to Thursday, December 1st, and we do the clamp trial. And they have the machine clamped, doing it and to see if her body can function on its own. And her vitals immediately dropped. Like she almost died right then. Like they had to quickly turn it back on to keep her from passing, like right that moment. And that really was when we were like, yeah, it's time to turn the machine off. And so we made arrangements for my family to be there. I have a very large, very supportive extended family. And so and we all live within 4 hours of the hospital. And so we made arrangements. My family knew what was going on and they wanted to be there if we wanted them, and which we did. And so we made the arrangements and my family came and they waited outside the hospital. They couldn't come in to the NICU, but they waited outside while my mom came in to be some extra emotional support and be there. And my husband and I got to hold her while she passed because basically it kind of came to the point of even on the machine, her heart was doing very wonky things, and it was kind of like she there was a pretty good chance that she was going to just die even on the machine within the next few days. And my husband and I made the decision that I would rather her be peacefully held in my arms while she takes those last breaths than the chance of it being, that night when I'm gone. And so they we put her in my arms and kind of clamped the machine, did all the medical things they needed to do to turn it off. And I got to hold her and just hug her and kiss her and sing over her and pray over her and let her know like she's gonna be okay and um that and then she passed in my arms that afternoon. And so that's kind of the nutshell of what happened, like her passing. And that was what now, 5 months ago? It was December 1st, 2022. So relatively recent.
Yeah,
Um,
that is pretty recent.
yeah. So then we came home. Um, we came home and it was December, so it's kind of like, and now it's Christmas and we have two older children. And so we had this interesting journey to walk and we're still walking it to a degree, obviously, because it was recent and the grief of loss never goes away. Like there's never going to be a time where it's like, oh, it doesn't hurt anymore, or it's not, we don't miss her, right? Like there's always going to be somebody missing from the family lineup here. Um, but we also, I think the place that we have the biggest comfort, that I have the biggest comfort is I believe that she is totally healed and whole and happy and healthy in a perfect body in heaven with the Lord. And so that gives me a lot of comfort and peace. And knowing that it wasn't a permanent goodbye, but that I will see her again when it's my turn to go, um, has really, I think, helped in the process of walking through grief because yes, it's sad and it's so painful. Um, but it also just kind of makes me much more plugged into real life now. Like, no, kind of having such a real physical reminder of how fragile life is makes me all the more appreciative of what I have right now and helps me to look forward all the more to what I believe um, my life will be like with the Lord. And so that's kind of where we are. And we walking this journey of helping, you know, doing our best to process grief. My husband and I process grief in a way that's healthy and that draws us closer to each other, draws us closer to our family, and draws us closer to the Lord, as opposed to um, maybe making less healthy choices. Um, has been an interesting walk as well, and really has drawn us closer as a family, I would say for sure, my husband and I and my two older children.
I feel like everybody processes grief so differently, and some, like you said, can go the opposite direction, like being consumed with the anger, being consumed with the grief. And it's hard to get out of that place once you're there sometimes. So I think it's, good that you've drawn together.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's so true. And it's so interesting to see how people process grief differently. Because even within our family, every single person is so different in how it comes out. Because for some, it comes out as anger and irritability. So others, it comes out as tears. Um, I think one thing that really, really helps just in general is to feel the feeling, regardless of what it is. Like let yourself feel the feeling instead of trying to avoid it or stuff it, has made such a difference. Um, in in our processing of like it's okay to be angry. It's okay to wrestle and have maybe emotions that sometimes as a society I think we sometimes label as like negative. Um, but they're not negative, they're just emotions. And if we can let ourselves feel and process that, it really will help us kind of grow through our pain because we get to choose like our pain can make us bitter or it can make us better. It can help us grow and become more compassionate, empathetic people, and maybe even help guide us in our purpose, right? Um,
I think
or
that's a
and
great way to
so
look at it.
yeah, it's something that like I don't want to minimize other people's pain either. Like everybody has pain, right? Like I think it's um, but you get to decide if how you use it. Um, And so I think just kind of having some of that awareness, and I've been really blessed with, just we have been blessed with a support system that kind of helps us process. Um, but yeah, it's definitely an interesting thing for sure, grief, but processing, like really letting yourself feel. I think that's just so important. I just
It
let it.
is. Because, yeah, like you said, I think we don't want to feel those, emotions that are negative, you know.
Mhm.
We try to just like bury them so we don't have to feel them and don't have to show them, but that never ends well for any of us. I know from experience. I've tried to
Right.
push them down too.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's a time and a place. Like there's sometimes when you kind of maybe need to say like I need to put this on the shelf. Like for example, if I'm having grief like really really rise up, it happens. And I know that I need to have a good cry. Um, I don't always let myself do it right away because I also have two young children that I'm the primary caretaker of, and I don't want to freak them out.
Right. No, I
Right.
understand.
So sometimes I kind of will hold it in a little, I'll hold it in and be like, and kind of just give myself permission to go like, it's okay to be sad, but let's hold the tears back until, my husband gets home.
Yeah, I've done a lot of like crying in the shower or,
Yeah,
somewhere where you're by yourself and
exactly. And I will say that I think crying in front of your kids, if you have, living children, it's not a bad thing. I think it can actually be beneficial to have them see like oh, mommy's a real person and has feelings.
Yeah.
Um, but using wisdom and discernment in those moments as well, because like knowing that sometimes it might kind of freak them out and sometimes it's just okay. Like,
Right. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes you can't control how the crying comes out.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and your story in particular hits home for me because my daughter Jasmine also had a congenital diaphragmatic hernia.
Oh, wow.
But we she was actually stillborn at
Mm.
32 weeks. So we
Oh, wow.
didn't, but we were looking at facing, the same things that you went
Mhm.
through.
Yeah.
And it's so, so I was just curious because before she was diagnosed with it, I had never heard of it. So
Mhm.
had you ever heard of it before your daughter's
No,
diagnosis?
no, not at all. Yeah, I had never heard of it.
Do you feel like
I
the doctors like actually gave you information about it when you got the diagnosis, or did you have to like research on your own?
actually, this is another way that for me I feel like the Lord really showed up. It just so happened, and this was totally like unplanned. The doctor who discovered the hernia or discovered the CDH happened like he happened to be the maternal fetal specialist for high risk at the clinic I went to. That was not an intentional thing. I just picked the doctor who had availability that coincided with my schedule, but it just happened to be the high risk doctor. And it just so happened that he went into the field and specialized in maternal fetal medicine in his specialty because his best friend in college had a child who had CDH.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So he in particular did a really great job, I felt like, of educating me. Um, immediately, like he explained it, what it was. He was actually very hopeful, on the odds, especially because in the last, 10, 15 years, technology has come so far, medically as well, for sure. So he was very, really informative, really helpful, and I had the privilege of being able to continue working with him throughout my pregnancy because um, he referred me out to, I'm in California, so he referred me to UCLA, which is where I gave birth and where the NICU we had faith in. Um, but this doctor was closer to my home, and so we were able to kind of work in tandem with a team closer to my home so that I wasn't having to drive to LA every week. So I only had to do it
Right.
every couple weeks. So he did a really good job, I felt like, of really educating me during my pregnancy whenever I had questions, um, or helping me find the answer or find the person who'd have the answer, like where to go in UCLA, because UCLA is really big. And I would say everybody was really helpful, and very kind and very willing to take the time to talk, um, and educate. But sometimes, like if it wasn't their specialty, they wouldn't necessarily know, and they wouldn't necessarily know where to send me.
Right.
So I would say, like, I did feel pretty well educated in what it was and the potential, all the pros, cons, risks, things like that. But I did have to do a little bit of digging to get the right person to get the right answer.
But I mean, that's really is, shows you how God works sometimes when people like that just show up in your life at the right time.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it was definitely, I was like,
So,
wow.
so why do you think that it's important to share your story?
I think there's two reasons. Number one, I think grief, loss, grief and loss really can sometimes be things that they're uncomfortable things to talk about sometimes. Um, and so it's not something that you like go start talking about a lot of times, right? It's not, you don't bring it up at a cocktail party, um, usually. And so I think there's like this unspoken, not like almost taboo about it. Like, um, I would say this also could apply to miscarriage as well. I've experienced 5 miscarriages over the course of my life. And it wasn't until I experienced like my third that I realized like, oh, like other people have had this happen. Like nobody talks about it, at least in my experience. Like people just didn't talk about stuff like that. And so I think being willing to share and be real helps other people know they're not alone. Because loss and grief, I think, is one of the most isolating experiences that we can have, oftentimes, because a lot of times, like the thoughts that come in are things like, no one knows what I'm going through, I'm alone in this, things like that, I think can really creep in. And so having voices out there that are saying, oh no, like I've been there, I've been through this, this is what I experienced, and help you see maybe you're no like, oh no, it's normal to experience this feeling, this emotion, or this thought, or feel whatever it is. Like there's things that I've found, things I never expected to be related to grief, maybe like feelings of overwhelm at certain points, or certain feelings and thoughts that if I didn't have friends and support who are willing to share with me, I would think, oh, maybe I'm just weird. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
So I think sharing our story is just so important for other people to know they're not alone. But I think it also, for like me, also helps me know I'm not alone, because so many times, like just like you just shared, like you experienced not only child loss, but the exact same diagnosis even with your child. And
Right.
how many people have come into my life and been like, oh my gosh, like I experienced this too. And some of them had children who survived this CDH and are now really healthy and living full lives, or other people who lost their children to that or a similar um, illness. And it kind of helps on both ends to go like, I'm not alone, and telling our story helps us process it, I think.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, every time I mean it's still hard, to tell it sometimes,
hmm
but I do feel like every time it helps me heal a little bit more, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's totally like I could totally geek out on this because this is something that I professionally do as a life coach, is study the brain, but there's actually like brain science and why that is. Because every time we tell the story of something, we're wiring our brain and giving it kind of context and helping it make sense of something that doesn't make sense. If that
That sounds like really interesting, like research.
Yeah. Well, it's so interesting. There's a book called The Whole Brain Child. So this has to do with like kids psychology, talks about this a lot as a coping mechanism to help your kids, but it actually applies even as adults. It's a same thing when it comes to trauma that you're having a hard time processing.
I actually
So
didn't know that, so I learned something today.
yeah, it's really fascinating how our brains work.
So I guess you kind of said it now, but do you have any other advice, like for someone who's newly going through loss?
Um, I would say for sure, like connect with people, like receive if people are like offering to support you, like receive it, like be willing to receive it. Um, and find people who have gone through something similar, who can really just support you. And because I'm going to tell you, like, I don't think I know anybody who's gone through something just really tragic who looks at someone who's going through it fresh with judgment, right? If you've gone through something really, really tragic and just traumatic and awful, I mean, really, like it sucks.
Yeah, it does.
Like, there's no sugarcoating it. It is crap. Um,
I think we would all agree with that.
right. And someone who's gone through that, like I would say I have yet to meet someone who's gone through something similar who has anything but compassion and sympathy and love and support. And they sometimes even know what you need when you don't know what you need
Yeah,
to
I
help
definitely
you cope.
agree.
Yeah. So being open to that, because we have to be willing to receive the like support and input and reach out, and sometimes reach out to say, hey, I need help, or hey, I'm going through this and I just need an ear. Like, can you be my friend? Um, but especially finding support systems of people who've gone through it. But I would also caveat it with finding people who have gone through some sort of grief and chose to let it make them better. Surround yourself with people because those are the people who are gonna lift you up and help you heal. Um, as opposed to like if there's people who have gone through it and they're kind of still really bitter about it. I'm not saying like shun them or anything, obviously, like you could still hang out with them,
Right.
but don't necessarily go to them for support. Yeah.
Right. That makes
Like,
sense. Yeah. Like, don't be mean to them over there, but look
right.
for the positive people to help you heal.
Yeah. Because like when we're in trauma, like we're kind of like we're in a pit and the pit, ha like, think about like it's a poop pit. There's like a nasty poop pit. And when you're down there, that's all you see and you think that that's all there is. And what you need is someone who's going to come down into the pit with you, put their arm around you, take a clean cloth, wipe your face a little bit, and say, "Hey, here, look up a little. Look, here's a step. And if we climb this step, we can get out of it a little bit." But they're not gonna push you up there, try to rush you through your process of getting out of the pit. But they're gonna stand with you and say, "It's okay. I'm here with you." And there is a way out, and I'm gonna walk you through that at your pace.
I love that visualization too. But no, I agree. I think that's really, really good advice. And, I found that I had two early losses and I didn't really know anybody else who had had a loss at that time.
Mhm.
And so after we lost Jasmine, that's when, I found like the loss community on Instagram and on Facebook and stuff. And I found them to be super helpful because, like you said, they've been through it too. And, they don't judge you for what you're going through. you know
Yeah,
they they understand it, they've been through it too, so it's just really nice to have that community.
for sure.
So is there anything else that you would like to add or share?
Um, I think the only other thing that I would add in all of that is kind of connecting to the previous question about like advice to people going through loss is um like if you have spiritual beliefs and particularly like if you or if you don't, that maybe that might be a chance to kind of explore because I know that I mean I'll just say like I can tell you with 100% confidence I would not be as functional as I am today without my faith. Um, that I think is really a huge part for me. And so, especially for people maybe who are like really struggling with how do I continue to live my life after this horrendous tragedy? Um, sometime it might be a good idea to explore maybe some answers outside of kind of what's tangible here.
Mhm.
Because that is, I can tell you from I've gone through a lot in my like this is just scratching the surface of some of the things I've overcome and experienced from depression and anxiety and self-harm and fertility issues and just there's a laundry list of things that this is just the most recent, honestly, um, of that I literally wouldn't be alive today without the the peace and the confidence in um the Lord and my faith.
I think, touching on what you said earlier, that is something that brings me comfort too, is knowing that, we'll see our daughters again someday.
Hmm.
And that does, knowing that they're in a safe place, and I agree with you. I think the same thing about my daughter, that she's up there happy, healthy, healed, and I
Hmm.
look forward to, you know being able to see her again.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think that's, it is, one of those things. It A lot of people after loss, I know they can get kind of angry with God, if
Hmm.
they're religious. And I think it's okay to be angry for a little while,
Oh,
but
for
it's
sure.
also okay to come back to it.
Yeah. Oh, I would agree. And building on that, like I definitely went through that. I went through, I would say I didn't camp there very long, but I had a week or two where I was wrestling with the Lord, like, how could you let this happen?
Yeah.
Like, how on, like, really? Like, how could, there were definitely a lot of questions. And I think that's huge, is like, he can handle that.
Yes.
He can handle our anger. He can handle our questions. He actually welcomes it because if you go to him with like, if it's genuine, like a genuine, like I'm angry and I'm hurt and but I want to understand, he'll actually meet us there and help us. At least that's what I found.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, because I prayed about it every day when I was pregnant with her, like, just
Mhm.
let her be okay, let her. And then so then I went through the same thing, like, okay, why did you not let her be okay? Like
Right.
I prayed about it every day, like, come on.
Right.
But
Yeah.
but yeah, it's a lot to deal with, a lot of questions and
Yeah.
emotions and everything all at once.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Well, and then you're dealing with all I mean, the postpartum hormones, like all that brings a whole nother element too.
Yeah, just to tack on to the grief. It's like, oh
Right.
yay, now I get all this too.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to come on and share your story today.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
I think it was a really nice conversation.
Yeah, this was really lovely. It was great to chat a bit, and I hope it helps somebody out there to feel seen and understood and not alone.
Thank you so much, Amanda, for sharing your story with us. I wanted to talk a little bit about religion since this was such an integral part to Amanda's story. I know not everyone believes in the same thing or even believes at all, but I wanted to say that if you are religious, that this is a reminder that it is okay to be angry at God or to be angry at your religion in general. It's okay to not like the comments about God has a plan or other things like that. Loss can really change your religious relationship. It can either make you go stronger in it or it can make you angry at it for a while and push it away. We all have different reactions. None of them are wrong. Don't let people tell you that you aren't allowed to be angry with God. I have always heard that it's okay to be angry because God can take it. He understands the pain you're going through. And if you aren't religious, it's still okay to be upset by those same types of comments. Basically, what I'm saying is that whatever you do or don't feel about it is absolutely 100% valid. There isn't one way to feel or one way to react. Always keep in mind that we all grieve differently, and you have to do what's best for you. You have to always protect your own heart. Thank you so much for tuning in, and remember, we are all in this together.